I will try to live up to your introduction, Emma. I will try. Maybe if we had the lights off, it makes the images much more intense on the screen. So the title, this phrase from the Creed, already containing the contradiction, the paradox. And this idea of paradox, something impossible at the human level, is sort of the theme of what we're going to try and look at in the next hour. A good place to start is to see ourselves in relation to eternity. This is what the ancients saw as the constellation Virgo or Virgo. And there has always been in all ancient great traditions an idea of a heavenly mother, a cosmic mother, a cosmic female being. Modern astrophysics now has the Virgo clusters and the Virgo superclusters, combining hundreds of millions of galaxies. So even today, this concept and its symbolic implication is part of modern science. And it's no surprise that 14th century Byzantine painters understood the same thing. They arrived at it by a different means. But this is a fresco in Serbia of the Mother of God standing accompanied by angels against a background of the starry sky. The stars are the same implication of a world, a life beyond the earthly life that we are bound to and towards which all spiritual aspiration looks. I'm always touched by this quotation from Wordsworth. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. But trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. So, another of the themes that is important is that the unimaginable grandeur, immensity of the cosmos, of the world of planets and galaxy clusters and superclusters and so on, has its correspondence in us. The great saying from the Hermetic tradition, as above, so below. And it's a central part of the mystical tradition that not the anthropomorphic individual, but the spiritual individual's inner life is the universe in miniature. Each one of us is potentially the microcosm, reflecting the laws that created the macrocosm, the whole of eternity. And it's this relationship between macrocosm, our life's star, this link within us with the stars of eternity. So this is an icon that lives normally in St. Catherine's Monastery in Mount Sinai. It's currently on exhibition in New York, in an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum that will tour various centers in America. It dates from the 6th or 7th century. In other words, the pre-iconoclast period, if you know your Byzantine history. The period when Christian art was developing in its relationship with Roman culture, where Christianity was an underground, unknown cult for the first 100 or 200 years, and it emerges into Roman society in the beginning of the 3rd century. And in a relatively short space of time, about 100 years, it becomes the religion of the Roman Empire. So it's an astounding force, and as it emerged into Roman society, it started to borrow forms, artistic forms, cultural forms, philosophical ideas, spiritual ideas current in Roman society. So the painting, quite naturalistic, which is typical of Roman painting of between the 2nd and 3rd century up until its Christian period now, the 6th or 7th century. A very conventional image, apparently, the Mother of God, seated on a throne with the Christ child, accompanied by 2 warriors, St. Theodore with the black beard and his black hair on her right, and on her left the young St. George, an image that we are familiar with throughout all of the Middle Ages. Behind, 2 very Hellenistic-looking angels, and these are details that the iconographer has half hidden, but they are looking upwards at a ray of light appearing from, if you can just make out the rim of a circle, that dark lunette shape from which appears the hand of God, emitting rays of light that fill the entire image and bring light to all the figures. And there's an elaborate cosmological symbolism which we don't immediately see. Yes, here it is in more detail. The hand of God, the descending light. If you know your angelology, the 9 choirs of angels, it comes to us through one of the very earliest Christian philosophers, Dionysius the Areopagite, perhaps the first bishop of Athens. He actually lived in the 5th century, although throughout most of history he was thought to have been a pupil of St. Paul. And he brings us this hierarchy, beginning above us human beings with angels, then archangels, and then thrones, powers, dominions, virtues. I'm never sure I get the order quite right. And then the cherubim, and highest of all are the seraphim. And this is a Christianized version of the Neoplatonic chain of being, great chain of being, which is the cosmological stages or ladder between humanity and the highest divine of eternity. Just to explain a bit, that little rim from which the hand of God emerges comes from, if you could imagine, these concentric circles symbolizing the universe, the higher world, the starry world, which we've already encountered. So this is a similar image, a little bit later in date, painted. Actually, it's not painted; it's a mosaic of the 1100s. But the same concept of the Mother of God presenting the world with the Christ child. Already we see an interesting fact, the extreme elongation. I think the head is probably 11 times the proportion of the body. It's in fact, the full figure is this. Sadly, this church no longer exists. It was destroyed in the 1920s in the civil war between Greece and Turkey in 1922, I think. So we only have this black and white photograph, and it states very well and very simply the great cosmic truth. Here is the Mother of God, an earthly being at this stage of her life, offering us God in the form of the Christ child. Above her, the circle representing the higher cosmological worlds, from which emerges rays of light filling the universe, and the background is the gold tesserae of the mosaics, glinting each. You know how Byzantine artists used to set each tessera in a slightly different angle, so that as you moved around, you got this glistening, glittering, moving effect. They were masters of dramatic presentation. So here is a famous image, also in mosaic, of a later date, the 14th century. This is the Kora church in Constantinople, Kyria Jami in Istanbul. And it shows the Mother of God with her epithet, the container of the uncontainable. And one senses that this vast inflated figure, completely unrealistic and not naturalistic, but and decorated with stars. We see one on her right shoulder, another one slightly damaged on her left shoulder, one on her head. And this decoration with stars is this reminder, this implication that she is a cosmic being. And the wording is interesting, this play of words, the container of the uncontainable. And this is an icon in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Same idea, another epithet from one of the hymns to the Virgin from this Eastern Orthodox theological tradition, more spacious than the heavens. It's a huge icon, about 3 meters high. She stands there fully present, raised arms in the prayer gesture with the Christ Emmanuel. And again, the two angels are a reference to this higher world, this world completely beyond the mundane existence where we live. And the whole theory, the whole theology of the incarnation gives us the link, our possibility of transcending the level of life where we live in order to be related to this other part of ourselves, which is the universe. And this presence of angels, because they have a specific place in the hierarchy. If you know your Dionysus the Areopagite. So we will look at a group of images, traditional images in Orthodoxy. The conception, the birth and the infancy of the Virgin. And the source for all this is an interesting book, the Book of James, also known as the Protevangelion, written in the second half of the 2nd century. So it's very, very early. It's some of the earliest writings, Christian writings, appearing after the Gospels themselves. And it is the material was very well known in the Middle Ages, and not only in the East, in the European Middle Ages. This book was the source for artists illustrating these events. Forgotten today, but well worth a visit. You can find it online easily. It's 30 or 40 pages too. So here is a monumental Russian icon of the Virgin from the 16th century. I think this is in the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg. Classic image called Hodigitria, or She Who Shows the Way. She is there in her presence, her monumental presence, showing us Christ, and by her gesture she draws our attention towards him. And then in a tradition of icon painting going back to the early Middle Ages, around the outside on the raised border, various scenes or stories related to her life. The same as the hagiographical icon of saints. You have the saint in the center and the story of his life around. And there are a group of these details. I'll show it here from the top row. And this is about the conception and the infancy of Mary. It's, as I say, it's not canonical, but it is a strong tradition and known throughout all of Christianity in the East and later in the European tradition. And we see here 4 scenes relating to the story of Joachim and Anna, her parents. And in a very great work of art like this, coming from a great school, it's interesting that the painters and the thought behind the painting wanted to emphasize these details. According to the Proto-Evangelion, on the left you see Joachim and Anna, who were childless. I can't help mentioning in passing that the symbolism of birth and children in sacred art is not biological but spiritual. We'll come to that a bit later. So anyway, there are Joachim and Anna, who were not young and childless, and they go to the high priest to ask for his help. So that is the scene on the left, and then the next scene, he's very, very tough with them. He tells them to go into the desert and pray, and turns away and slams the door on them, basically, which is the scene one in from the left. And then here we see them in the desert, these strange rocky mountains, praying in the desert. And then finally, the scene on the right, the Archangel Gabriel comes to Joachim and foretells that his wife Anna will give birth to a child. So we don't have to be too worried about the literalism of all this. It isn't the naturalistic world, but the spiritual world. Of course, we don't deny the narrative of the story, but its symbolic meaning is outside time. It doesn't belong anywhere but, as in all spiritual tradition, the present moment. So, a very famous Byzantine sacred site is the Ammiraglio Church in Palermo, dating from the late 1000s, early 1100s. Many of you probably have been to Palermo and seen the Byzantine churches. And this is, there are 2 apses either side of the main central apse with the altar. On the left is Joachim, and on the other side is Anna. So we see this monumental figure of Joachim beneath the starry sky. So the imagery is telling us that this is a cosmic event that we are involved in. And it's interesting to look at him closely, because the way he's been depicted, first of all, this gesture, the palms outwards, this is the symbol of the concentration of the interior life, holding the material world, the physical world, away, so that the attention is focused interiorly. And his look, I think most people would agree, corresponds to that. His gaze is concentrated and inner. So this, of course, is related to the practice in the monastic life of Eastern Orthodoxy. Begins in the desert in the 2nd or 3rd or 4th century and continues in the great traditions of Mount Athos in the 10th and 11th century, and flowers in Constantinople in the 13th and 14th century. Silence is the condition of spiritual life and spiritual experience, inner silence. And the Greek word for silence, hesychia, gives the name of the practice in the monastery is Hesychasm. So some of you may know the anthology of writing called Philokalia, an anthology of mystical Byzantine theological, contemplative theologians, mystical theologians, beginning in the desert tradition of the 2nd, 3rd century, and some of them from the Mount Athos tradition, where they speak in a very direct and practical discussions, psychological discussions about the practice of interior silence, the continuous interior prayer linked with the rhythm of the breath, sometimes the rhythm of the heartbeat. Today you would have to go to one of the great Zen foundations in Japan to find such a degree of rigor and discipline, physical discipline, mental discipline, spiritual discipline, an all-demanding life leading to the higher knowledge, the transformed insight that such contemplative inner work can lead to. And then, while we're speaking about Hesychasm, we have to mention St. Gregory Palamas, who revived it in the 14th century. A lot of people think Hesychasm really was a phenomenon of the 14th century, but it was never not part of monastic life. It was simply went through a very big revival in the 14th century. This was a fragment of fresco discovered comparatively recently in the Vatupedi monastery on Mount Athos, and it's a portrait of Gregory of Palamas, probably painted within a decade or two of his lifetime. And again, I show it here because of the look, a look which he shares in a way with Joachim. This look of inner, peaceful humanity, no agitation, and an expression of focus and stillness and contemplative prayer or mystical contemplation. So this is Anna, the mother of Mary. This is a fragment of fresco from a Nubian church discovered in the 1930s by Polish archaeologists, and at present it's in the museum in Warsaw. So a most beautiful image of the mother of the Virgin, typically for this early period, 7th century, the very, very large eyes, meaning complete seeing of everything, all seeing, and this beautiful gesture signifying silence. This is the stillness or the silence. So we are reminded by the symbolism of the imagery of the event of Mary's birth, being a spiritual event, not necessarily just a historical event. And in fact, we have the great John of Damascus, one of the greatest of the early theologians, his own comments: God's divine goodness ended Anna's mystical barrenness. So he's giving it to us absolutely straight. It was a spiritual condition. And she gave birth to a child. The end of barrenness proved clearly that the world's sterility would cease, and that the withered trunk would be crowned with vigorous mystical life. So it's the same, it's the world, the human condition, which is barren, and this possibility, this story, this imagery, which we receive from various different traditions here in the Orthodox icon painting tradition, of the process of the of mystical contemplation, of practice, the practice of hesychast prayer. A Serbian fresco of the 14th century showing the birth of the Virgin. St. Anna on the left, in this strange posture, sitting up, and the gesture of sorrow with the wrist under the chin. It comes from antiquity. We've seen this gesture in carvings on sarcophagi of the late antique period, Roman period. She's attended by midwives, and on the right, Joachim, giving a blessing gesture, and down below, the midwives, who are on the right, washing the newly born Mary. So the circumstances of her birth are mysterious, and this is why a painting that understands this at a deep level can never be naturalistic. The images that we see refer to what we know in the three-dimensional world, but we are being called to open to a multi-dimensional world, beyond time, beyond space. Now this is an icon, a Russian icon of the 14th century in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Very, very strange. I've never seen another icon ever remotely like it. The same story. There is Anna, and around her the various, behind her, this time on the left above, Joachim looking out, looking out from the doorway of a building. And on the right, the attendants, and down below, the midwives bathing the newly born child. The bathing, of course, is spiritual, an image of spirituality, of purity. So, if we look, many people walk straight past this because it's not an obviously beautiful image. It's very large, twice as large as the way we are seeing it on the screen at the moment. But every single figure in the image performing their ritual act of birth or attending to birth or witnessing birth is looking directly out of the picture at us who behold the picture. Down on the left, for example, the midwives with the newly born child, these details of the font and the water being poured, but they look very clearly and very directly at us. Likewise, over on the right, the attendants, they are performing their function, and this extraordinary futuristic or constructivist architecture in the background, always the imagery helping us not be too attached to the literalism of the architecture, but a sort of dreamlike or fantasy architecture, an architecture. Well, actually, one of the fathers in the Philokalia refers to the spiritual world where there's what he calls the house of spiritual architecture. If we look in the top part, there's Joachim, Mother of God herself, her first attendant. So it's very mysterious. We are called into this event by this look. They are calling us to engage. What could that possibly mean? It is an invitation to turn to that possibility, that life in us that remains undeveloped, asleep in some traditions, where the true awakening, the true turning towards enlightenment, transformation, or ascent. One of the great fathers of Mount Athos, John Climacus, has this famous picture of the ladder that the monks engaged in, well, not only anyone engaging in this spiritual life has to ascend each step. And even the ones at the very top, some of them are being pulled down by devils. So it's this ladder, idea of ladder, comes into Orthodoxy through Platonic or Neoplatonic philosophical ideas. Yes, back in the Chora church in Constantinople, there's it's famous for its mosaics. This is the 14th century. 14th century, a very, very intense and alive period because of the revival of Hesychasm under the great Gregory of Palamas. So this is an event described in the Book of James. It's called the first 7 steps of the Virgin. A nursery scene such as could be witnessed in any household. The child learning to walk, taking 7 steps from the nurse to her mother. But this is not just a nursery image, because the Virgin is very often thought of as one of the great hesychasts, one of the great supreme achievers of spiritual enlightenment. So the first 7 steps are her first 7 steps on earth, and the text goes on, many people don't remember this. Having walked 7 steps on earth, she never again walked on the ground. So it refers again to this idea of levels, the ladder, if you like, of the cosmic ascent or the spiritual ascent. I think it's also interesting that the figure of the nurse is pure classical antiquity, the pagan world, and she walks towards her mother, so it's the transition from the pagan to the Christian, maybe. A classic image, Byzantine image here, of the presentation of the Virgin in the temple. We see in the center the figures of her parents, Joachim and Anna. They are handing the Virgin over to the high priest, where she has already stepped up 2 steps, and according to the Proto-Evangelium text, having been received into the temple, she has left the world and she ascends what's called the 7-stepped stairway. And she stayed under this baldachin, and there she communicated daily with angels. This is a symbolic description of her spiritual state, the high level of achievement that she was already spiritually at the angelic level. And a Russian icon of the same theme. Very interesting how the tradition is always readable, even if the cultural or the artistic style is different. But we immediately recognize all the elements of the story of the presentation of the Virgin in the temple. Joachim and Anna on the left, the group of virgins. She was one of a group of virgins, each one given a different yarn of wool, different colored wool to spin. And it's said that the Virgin had the red, the imperial red, or the purple, that was also the veil that covered the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple. So we've got here also allusions to the symbolism of a curtain. The curtain is normally what closes, what shuts, what hides. So an open curtain is what is revealed, is what is given, what is shown. So now we look at a group of icons, again relating to the Mother of God's life: the Annunciation, the Nativity, and what's called her Dormition. This is a little icon, beautiful little icon in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow of the 14th century. A marvelous example of what is called Paleologan Renaissance. There was this amazing period in the final 150 years of Constantinople. Constantinople had been occupied by the Crusaders, and they instituted what's called the Frankish kingdom. It was a disgraceful event. They got bored with the long and arduous journey to Jerusalem, found themselves outside the walls of Constantinople, and they thought, well, here is, beautiful women, wonderful food, lots of jewelry and luxury. Let's not bother with Jerusalem. And they attacked and occupied Constantinople and set up their own kingdom there for about 60 years or so. And then there was a very brief moment. We have to remember, by the way, the status of Constantinople in the medieval mind. It was nowhere in Europe, no city in Europe came anywhere near its significance. Today you'd have to think of New York, Paris, London, Berlin, and all in, and even so Constantinople would amount to more. It was the highest center of learning. There was no Dark Ages in Constantinople. They never lost their contact with their study of antique knowledge and the great thinkers of antiquity, Aristotle, Plato, and so on. In fact, when Constantinople fell, a number of the scholars came to Florence, and that is said to be the origin of the Florentine Renaissance and the birth of humanism, when Plato was reintroduced to the West. The West knew Aristotle, but they'd forgotten Plato. What we forget is that the majority of the great scholars and intellectuals from Constantinople went to Moscow. Constantinople was the second Rome, or the new Rome. When it fell to the Turks in 1453, Moscow declared itself the third Rome to guarantee the mystical continuity of the true faith. And for 150 or 200 years, in the late 14th and 15th century, Moscow was a sort of Byzantine city in a way. There were two huge institutions with 1,000 Greek monks in each. We would think of them as universities. In fact, they were monasteries. And that is where all the great mysteries of Eastern Christianity were transferred from the Byzantine world after its fall to the Turks to Russia, to the Slavs. Anyway, to come back, this is an icon that's probably painted by a Greek painter, a Byzantine master. Some think it's by a Russian trained by Byzantine. It's very difficult to tell at this period which icons were painted by Russians and which by Byzantine masters. So it's very vivid, the language here. The background, the architecture, again the symbolism of architecture. Architecture is what encloses space. So it symbolizes the inner life. And it's a commentary in the background of what's going on in the foreground. The Archangel's Annunciation to Mary. It's not telling us so much of a historical or a narrative event, but a mystical event. We know from other images that Mary is on the great spiritual adventure to become, a great cosmic being. And so this mysterious architecture with its doorways and windows and entrances and passages is a commentary on the wonders of the inner life, featured by reference to recognizable architectural forms, but basically symbolic, not naturalistic. Another very great icon from the same period, it's in the museum in Ohrid, in Macedonian, or a Constantinopolitan icon, of course. And we see how far the painter can depart from naturalism and yet tell the story with all the necessary features. Perhaps there's not time to to describe it in great detail, but It's a very well-known icon, and the mystery of the space, the movement, the relationship, what is being transferred, where and how it's happening. It's there in the language of the artist. Artists in the best sense they see things that ordinary people don't see. They are the vehicle through which very high ideas can pass, especially if the artist has trained himself or herself as a contemplative, as a mystical and as a contemplative, as is the case here, of course. So it's one thing to analyze and explain, but the language of art is an emotional language, and we receive these impressions not necessarily just with the box of machinery up here, but in the psyche, in the soul. Like listening to music. We listen to great music, and we don't want anybody to explain to us the musicology of it. We just let it speak to us, and art like this does that. This is a little icon we've got in the Temple Gallery, which is probably from one of the great Moscow painters of the end of the 15th century. And again, it's a marvelous example of how the story is told, and yet the event is taken out of the physical world and reproduced in a non-physical or non-material context. And those of you of the King's Foundation School of Traditional Arts, I can't get my head around its new name, will no doubt immediately see that there's a obvious sense of geometry and proportion in the way he's worked. At the same time, I think that these artists at this level of work were not using compasses. They found the proportion from their instinct. So here's another great icon, monumental icon of the Virgin and Child. This is, I think it's in the Museum of Pskov, medieval city in northern Russia. And again, what I want to draw attention to is three of the images from the top row. We'll go straight to them, because this is the Annunciation. And the artist needed three separate images of the Annunciation to tell us what he understands, what can be gleaned mystically, psychologically, spiritually from the event. There are three stages of the Annunciation. The Archangel appears to the Virgin, and her first reaction is her perturbation. She's surprised, she's shocked. The second stage, the middle image, is her doubt, but I know not a man. And then the third stage is her acceptance. So be it. So three different stages of this event, and we have to maybe think of them as stages in spiritual ascent. So the left hand, it's very interesting, between the buildings and the architecture in the left hand, we see the curtain stretched across, symbolizing something mysterious, something hidden. In the middle one, it's gone, the curtain. So something is revealed now, something has appeared for all to see, for all humanity to receive. And then in the third one, because this lunette, which we see at the top here, this little half circle, from there descends the ray of light with the dove, the Holy Spirit, which enters Mary, and through which the conception takes place, from which the birth of Christ takes place. So we cannot say that this is a biological birth. there are traditions about higher bodies. The Theosophists talk about the mental body or the cosmic body. So Mary's birth herself, as we've seen, is already mysterious. And now, through the Annunciation, we're coming to the even more mysterious, the incarnation, God, whoever or whatever we understand by that, appearing as a human being amongst humanity, the mystery of the incarnation. So here is a Byzantine icon of the Nativity. And I found this 7th century prayer from the Nubian or Egyptian, it's called the Magical Book of Mary and the Angels. Let the rock split before me today. Well, we see that where the descending light has split the rock. The iron dissolve before me today. Let the demons withdraw before me today. Let the powers of the light appear to me. Let the angels and the archangels appear to me today. Let the doors that are closed, yes, we've talked about that, open for me at once and quickly, so that your name may become my helper and life, whether in all the day or in all the night. So this is a marvelous and powerful poetic description of events on a scale that's beyond, that is, we have to say, spiritual or cosmic. So if we look at the image, all the elements of the traditional Byzantine and later the Russian icon nativity, the Mother of God lying on a carpet having given birth, the newly born Christ child with the ox and the ass. In the lower left corner, the midwives bathing the Christ child. On the left, the journey of the three kings, and on the right, the shepherds. I can't help it because, my mind works this way. Shepherds are a symbol of the practitioner of the spiritual life. John of Damascus says of Joachim guarded his thoughts as a shepherd guards his sheep. So this image of the shepherd in traditional arts, it even passes into Europe, and you get these 18th century and bucolic images of the countryside and the shepherds and so on. But it has its origin as a mystical symbol. And then in the upper part of the icon, the angelic world and this idea of ascent into the divine cosmic realms. A very well-known Russian icon, 15th century Novgorodian icon, now in a museum in Vicenza, actually. And another quotation from the book of James, who describes how the earth stopped at this moment of the birth. And I, Joseph, was walking and was not walking. And I looked up into the sky and saw the sky astonished. I looked up at the pole of the heavens and saw it standing, and the birds of the air keeping still. And I looked down upon the earth, and the faces of all were looking upwards, and I saw the sheep walking, and the sheep stood still. And the shepherd raised his hand to strike them, and his hand remained up. And all things in a moment were driven from their course. So this is a kind of description of an ecstatic, out-of-the-body experience, which is how it must, the only way we can think of this. And the beauty of particularly the famous Novgorod style, where medieval icons could tell us, could illustrate the events with a marvelous kind of minimalism. The narrative has been reduced to the minimum, and the emphasis is on the symbolism. So anyone who knows icon will immediately recognize Joseph in the lower left corner. It's actually called the doubt, or rather the temptation of Joseph, one of the shepherds, because Joseph was not party to the mysteries, and it was impossible for him to understand, and this is the devil feeding doubt into his mind. On the right, the washing of the newly born child. Halfway up on the right, the shepherd. On the left, the three kings, and up above, the angelic world. And then up above, the divine world, and the light connecting the higher world with the cave, or the darkness, the lower world, where the event takes place. According to the Proto-Evangelium, the Nativity didn't take place in the inn, as we know from the St. Luke account, but in a cave in the desert, in the darkness. Yes, the Dormition of the Mother of God. I'm always cross when I see in museum exhibits pictures called the death of the Virgin. The Virgin never died. She is one of 4 people, I think, who ascended to heaven with their bodies. Elijah, the prophet Elijah, is one. Enoch is one. And the Virgin, she fell asleep. That's why it's called the Dormition. This is the scene where her body asleep is accompanied by the 12 apostles. And there are traditionally, in this tradition, bishops, one of them being Dionysius the Areopagite. Their presence signifying the mystical, or if you like, esoteric current that is behind the symbolism that's being illustrated. She is received into the cosmic world, into the heavenly world. As students here at the King's Foundation School for Traditional Arts, is that what you're called? Something like that. You'll see this beautiful shape, the Vesica. And above, the seraphim, the highest of the angelic order. The last thing you see before you ascend into heaven is the six-winged and bodiless seraphim. So marvelous imagery, allusions to the cosmological higher world. So here's a Russian icon of the 15th century. I've got 2 which illustrate, and it shows how far artists could go to express their ideas, still just recognizable images from the real world, but reduced to a sort of dreamlike quality. There are the 2 bishops, the architecture in the background, the seraphim, this great shape which is the higher cosmic world. And another one from the same, both of these are in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Icons are really the original abstract art, where images are used as ideograms, but they are more than ideograms because they come from not something intellectual, but something infinitely higher. The insights of schools of paintings that were also schools of mystical contemplation or hesychast prayer. So we come to the end now. We can't have a lecture on the Virgin Mary without the greatest of all images of all time, the famous Virgin of Vladimir, an icon painted in Constantinople in around 1100 and brought to Russia at the time that the Slavs were being converted to Christianity. In fact, this is, one of the so-called miraculous icons. Now, in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Originally it was in one of the cathedrals in Moscow. The Soviets put it in a museum, in a way rightly, because it can be better looked after. And when the regime changed in, 1989, they built a chapel so that you can go and visit it as a pilgrim and venerate it, or you can go as an art lover or a tourist and just go to look at it. And if we look more closely, in fact, the older parts, the Byzantine parts, are the faces. Nearly all the rest is different conservation campaigns, mostly in the 16th and 17th century. But here is her look. Here is her relationship with Christ. Here is her inner presence. Here are the stars that refer to her, we see both simultaneously her humanity and her cosmological status. And I end with this prayer, again from the 7th century, that really says it all. I am Mary, I am Mariam, the Arabic name for Mary. I am the mother of the life of the whole world. I myself am. So, thank you. Thank you.